All right, here we are looking at installation on our Ruger RXM trigger kit. So these are the parts of the trigger kit. We've got our enhanced minus connector with the trigger bar alignment tab on it, the reduced powered firing pin safety spring, increased powered trigger spring, and then our over travel stops for reducing over travel and shortening the reset distance. So if you are familiar with the stock trigger, you'd know why you'd want upgrade. I'm using, before you start, you're going to want to check the gun to make sure it's all clear and everything. I'm actually using a dummy round, so I would encourage anybody that does a lot of dry firing to use dummy rounds. Anyway, let's just show the performance of the stock trigger. So kind of what you have going on is you reach kind of a first resistance, and then there's kind of a lot of movement into the wall. So let me see if I can show that. So there's kind of that first resistance right there, and then there's a lot of movement until I find probably what's more like the real wall, and then there's a little bit more movement until it finally breaks, and then the resets back, and then you kind of have that movement again back into the wall, and then more movement until it breaks. So what our trigger kit does is it cleans up all of that. So let's start with a broken down gun. So you guys should know how to remove that. These are definitely not as easy to work on as Glocks, because you actually do have to use more than just the Glock Armorer's tool. We will be using our Armorer's kit with an Armorer's backplate Armorer's tool, but we will need to use some other tools for this job. These two pins here to take this down do require hammering, which I'm not really a big fan of having to use a hammer and punch on firearms for disassembly and stuff, but there's a number of firearms that do that. So anyway, let's get into it and let's get this taken down and the new trigger components installed. So I'm going to set these aside here. All right, so first order of business is let's remove these two pins. Okay, so preference on order, I think actually the first thing I would do, since there's this leaf spring in here that holds the this takedown, I would take this out first, because you can't take out the FCU or the registered part of the gun from this grip module without having that out of the way. And why I would recommend doing that first is I've had issues with this leaf spring flying on me and having to go and find it. So if I do that while this pin here is still installed, then I will have less risk of that leaf spring flying and having to go chase it down, which honestly, I'm surprised I still have this after all the hunting I've had to do with it. But okay, so the easy way to do this is just press this little leaf spring down in here all the way, tilt the gun to the side, and that will kind of fall free. Okay, and then I can hold that out of the way. Then I do have to hit these two pins with a punch, and so this is a 3/32 punch and just a mallet, and then I'm using just a block here to do this. So let me have to do some work on that. All right, let me hit that again. I'm just not quite using enough force here. There we go. Okay. Well, not quite. So again, I'm not really a fan of having to use a hammer and punch to work on firearms, but anyway, that's how this grip module is set up. So this other larger pin here on this side is hopefully going to be kind of similar to that. I could use a larger punch on this, but I just have the 30 seconds available, so I'm just going to use that. Okay, and then I just punched that across, and that's out. Okay, so I've got my two pins and the that takedown assembly. Okay, so I'm gonna want to be careful and note that there's this leaf spring that could fall out, and there's this retaining clip for that one pin that can fall out. So note their orientations in case you have to reseat those. But now that I've got those out, now the rest is pretty easy. So now here's my, I'll set my grip module aside, and then I've got my FCU or the registered module here. I'm not sure what they actually call this. Anyway, so now it's kind of like working on a Glock. So I'm going to push this trigger pin out. Okay, and then I'm going to remove my slide catch. And then I'm going to pull the locking block out. That will pull apart. Okay, now I have the trigger assembly here. And this is a little non-intuitive, but you actually just kind of pull the trigger assembly aside and then kind of slide this out. And then the trigger drops free. And then I've got my registered receiver there. Okay. So this is a unique housing for the gun. So for that reason, the Glock triggers aren't completely compatible. This is a very Glock-like trigger bar. You can use Glock Gen 3 trigger bars on these. I think these are really good quality, and I've seen some funkiness with some of the Glock trigger bars, just variations. So I think you're going to actually be better off. The tolerance is controlled in manufacturing on these. I think you're going to be better off using their stock trigger bars. So here as I take this apart, it's just like a Glock. I just pulled the trigger bar, pull the spring. This spring kind of, when you put it back in, it's going to go down and then rotate on like that. So I've got to rotate it back and then pull it up to get it out. And then here's my, this is a minus connector that they have. It's unmarked, but it's the equivalent of a Glock minus connector, and it functions as a Glock minus connector. So I push that, pull that out. I'm going to set these stock parts here, these two on the lower side, because I'm going to replace those with the parts from our kit. So here I'm going to use the enhanced minus connector. Just install that, make sure it sits down in there. Looks like it's got a good level of standout, that there's a good amount of tension on there. That tension adjustment is something that could need to be adjusted depending on what the reset profile is like, or if there's not enough tension, it can cause issues. If there's too much tension, it can cause some lockup issues and stuff. But that looks really good. So those connectors come with their tension already adjusted. Okay, so then let's install the increased powered trigger spring. This increased powered trigger spring is going to drop our pull weight by about a half a pound, and it's going to lighten up that pre-travel as well. So I get that down into that hole, and then again it's that orientation where it's coming that direction. And then I want to get this into the notch of the trigger bar. So I rotate that over there. There's a little notch on that trigger bar that goes in. And then I'm going to hold like some forward tension on this so that it stays in that notch as I push this down in there, kind of to the side like this, and get it down in there and then seated. And then I want to just verify that my trigger spring is in the notch of that trigger bar when I got that in. Okay, and that's really how simple that minus connector install is. And now I'm just going to reinstall this trigger assembly back into the receiver. So to do that, it's just the reverse operation here, where you kind of pull it apart a little bit, and there's back here, there's these little a recess where this goes into on the housing. Okay, and then I just have to, so I get those back to about the right place, and those are kind of in place. Then I'm going to come over here, and I'm going to make sure that that side seated down into that receiver. Then I'm left with this side circle here, and then I can kind of push this and rotate it until it kind of snaps down in there. Okay, now it's down in there. So now I've got my trigger assembly the housing back in there. Now I just need to reinstall the rest of this. So what makes this easier is if you put the connector back in so that it's holding the trigger bar down. Okay, and then I'll come over here, I'll take my locking block and then realign that, and then that will hold that receiver from moving apart again. Okay, and then I'm going to take my trigger pin on this side and go across, but I'm not going to push it all the way in because I'm going to take my slide catch now and put it back in here. Nice thing about this versus a Glock is you're less likely to get this slide catch spring seated incorrectly. So I push that through, and then that pin kind of locks in place with the slide catch, and then I'm going to verify the slide catch is functioning correctly. Okay, so that's all together right now. Now I can go back and install this into my grip module. So to do that, I just push that back in and then slide it down. Then we're good to go. So again, on this, because I'm going to check my leaf spring and that retaining clip to make sure they're in place. And I'm going to put this pin in place first to hold that leaf spring in place so that it doesn't fly on me. I've had issues with it flying trying to put the takedown lever in there, assembly in there. So, okay, so I push that oriented in. Remember, this little grooved end was up in that orientation. So then I come over here to my block again, and then I'll hit it with the hammer. Just keep it aligned. Okay, and then that's in, looks good, holding the leaf spring down in there correctly. And then I can come in here and I can start my leaf spring. Okay, so this takedown lever has kind of two sides to it. This side is the forward side, this side is the back side. So it comes back towards the rear here like that. Okay, I'm gonna kind of line this up like part way in there. Then I'm gonna put the leaf spring tension on it so that I can get that started over it, and then I just pushed it into place, and now it's locked in and it won't move back and forth. So that leaf spring is holding it. Okay, so that's good. So that's the lower assembly minus this last pin. So we'll just pop this pin in. We'll come across this direction like this. Okay, and then I'm gonna take my armorer's tool to fine align that to center it up. Okay, so now that's good. All right, get those guys out of the way. Okay, now I'm going to set that lower aside that I've just completed. Actually, what I'm going to do first is I'm going to do some checks on this. I'm going to pull my trigger forward, resting on the safety, and just verify that this trigger bar comes up onto the trigger housing, onto the drop safety shelf. These two portions here, this is the drop safety shelf under there, so right there. So the trigger will come up onto it. And sometimes this enhanced minus connector, this trigger bar alignment tab, could be needing adjustment. If it does happen to not be able to get up onto the drop shelf, then you can take your armorer's tool to the back here, kind of pry it up as you move it forward, and that will kind of self-adjust that trigger bar alignment tab if it needs it. Usually they should just be drop-in and good to go without any adjustments. But the other thing I'm going to check is just how that trigger bar alignment tab's all interfacing, and that all looks good. Okay. All right, so I'm happy with the lower, so we're going to move to the upper, and we're going to install the reduced powered striker safety spring. So to do that, I'm going to use my armorer's tool right here on this striker sleeve and push it down. Okay, so push that striker sleeve down like that down into the frame, and then I'm simultaneously going to slide that cap off. Now what I'm going to be careful about is there's a spring assembly in here for the ejector, and I can launch part of that spring assembly once the tension is removed from it. So I'm gonna make sure that my thumb's over on this side where that spring assembly is so that I don't launch it when I do it. So I have to simultaneously push that down and then move my finger to get that slide cap off, or the back plate off. Okay, so now that's off. Now I can pull the spring assembly. So I'm gonna be careful. So I pulled that little black part of it out on accident, and I'll just keep that together. That part is what can launch on you if you're not careful. So I'm gonna hold that separate. I'm gonna pull my striker assembly out, and then I'm going to push my firing pin safety down in and drop the ejector to the side here. Okay, so the ejector just fell out when I pushed that down. I have to be pushing that down, and then I can just drop my firing pin safety out, and then I can remove this spring and then replace it with the reduced powered spring. Okay, to do this, there's kind of a retention in there. So if I push this down in and then kind of turn it counterclockwise, then the spring will retain in there. And then I just reverse that order, putting this all back in. So I'll take that, push that down, make sure there's good spring tension back and forth, nothing's binding. Then I put my ejector back in, and that's going to hold that in place. Then I can put this spring assembly in to hold that ejector, and put my striker assembly back in, and then I can put my back plate on. Instead, though, of the normal back plate, I'm going to put this armorer's back plate on. Okay, so to do that, I get it lined up in the channel there, and I'm ready to push some tension on it, and then I'm going to push this striker sleeve down, and then once I get past that, then I'll push this ejector spring in. So I'm going to use my armorer's tool to push that sleeve down. Okay, I got it over that. Now I just need to get this part of the spring assembly. Same thing, okay? And then now I've got that armorer's half plate installed. All right, now I can check my engagement level, and I realize there's one thing I forgot to do on my lower, and that's install my over travel stops. So on this gun, you can use both over travel stops usually because there's so much over travel that exists in the gun. So with that, you take the thicker one, the number 1, and you put the number 2 behind it in a stacked configuration like that. And then you pull the trigger forward, resting on the safety, and then you expose this little slot here that you just put these down into to the side. So right there. And then those will pretty much retain themselves in there, but the trigger's always pulled to the rear, so it helps it retain as well. And then those just provide an over travel stop position, so the trigger doesn't keep on moving further back after the trigger's pulled. Okay, so this is all together with the armorer's plate installed, so it's pretty much done, and we can do our function check and our safety checks and stuff. So first thing I'm going to look at is, okay, so that pre-travel feels nice and smooth, and then this wall that I found is in a different spot than it was before. It's a little bit further back, so it got rid of a lot of that stacking into that kind of false wall, and then it should just break right from there. Yep, so just nice and clean, really short, and then back reset. So that's tremendously upgraded and cleaned up. So what I'm going to look at now is I'm going to look at my engagement between the firing pin and the trigger bar. Trigger bar to firing pin engagement is what I'm looking for. So I need a flashlight for that. So 1 second, let me grab that. Okay, so looking at the engagement here, so we can see there's the firing pin and then there's the trigger bar. There's a little bit of the trigger bar below the firing pin. So that's looks like that's greater than the 2/3 required coverage, probably closer to a little bit greater than 80%. So you can see when I pull the trigger, that would be like definitely under engaged, but that's not where it actually is because I'm pulling the trigger. Okay, and then I'll just look at that again to verify. Yep, so that's good in that direction. So now I'm going to pull the trigger, hold it pinned to the rear, rack the slide, and then check engagement and reset. And that looks good too. That looks a little bit greater, more like 90%. And then as it resets, it goes to a good probably 2/3 level there, so it's right back on the wall and really good. So this is performing really well now at nice wall, clean brake, good reset. So if this was struggling to reset or struggling to brake, I might make an adjustment to over travel by removing one of the over travel stops. But on these guns, should be good with both over travel stops. And really that's the install. So the rest of what I'm going to do is just do a safety check, make sure that the striker safety is functioning. I do that by pulling the trigger and then make sure that I'll move it back so that the striker safety is there. Or I mean the firing pin is beyond the striker safety. Then I'll pull the trigger forward so it's resting on there. Then with the armorer's tool, I'll press on the striker manually while I pull the trigger. So I'm pulling the trigger forward to push the safety in so that I'm not pushing the safety against the frame. And then I'll pull the trigger back, and then I should see my right hand move in once the striker safety is bypassed. And there it is. So let's check that again. So pull that, make sure the striker's back, check the striker safety. So push in on the striker, move back, and there, striker safety. It's good. So, and then there's a nice clean rattle after, and there's no striker safety interference happening. So anyway, that's really the install. So now I can just install the normal back plate. So I don't even have to, I had that snap cap in there. So I don't even have to remove the slide again for that. But I am going to be careful to not launch that spring again. So I'm going to hold my thumb there while I pull that off. And then I can just install the normal back plate. And there we go. So we're pretty much done. Just verify the function. Looks really good. Okay. And then if I did need to get in there for the over travel stops, I could just pull the trigger forward resting on the safety, and then I could go in and pull one of those to remove it. And so that's all there really is to that. And this is really a great upgrade. One thing to note is with Glocks and these kinds of guns, when you pull the trigger without upward pressure on the slide, like from a mag with dummy rounds or like simulating live fire. So I just have an empty mag in here, and that's going to push up on the slide release against the slide, so it provides a little bit of upward pressure on the slide. That keeps the slide from pulling down into the frame. So that's going to be how the trigger is going to perform the best, because if the back of the slide pulls down into the frame as I'm pulling the trigger, then I would feel and perceive that as creep that doesn't really exist. So these should be almost ideal wall and brake. And the only other thing is if my trigger was struggling to come back up and re-engage the trigger safety, coming back up on that drop safety shelf, then I might need a trigger bar alignment tab adjustment. That's right here. And you can do that in a few different ways. If it's struggling to get up there, I can just come behind here and pry up with a little bit of force to get that trigger bar up on there, and then that will get a little bit more clearance on that alignment tab for that. Sometimes if they're really off, you could need to adjust that trigger bar alignment tab manually directly, like maybe with the screwdriver directly under here. Not over putting too much force, but just enough to bend it up slightly. So I would come in here like this and then just bend up slightly, but it's unlikely that you'll need to do that on these guns. So anyway, just look at that performance one more time, and looks great. So that's the install. Thanks for watching.